Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the joint launch of The Bridge and Ariadne, I Love You. I'm Jay Ashley Smith, author of Ariadne, I Love You.
And I'm J.S. Breukelaar, author of The Bridge. Welcome.
And we're going to kick things off this morning or this evening for you folks joining us from the US with a reading. And J.S. is going to read an extract from The Bridge.
Chapter 1, Tower. I was raised by 3 sisters, one a witch, one an assassin, and the third just batshit crazy. By the time I left our home deep in the Starveling Hills, I'd met the middle one, Tiff, once, but I never told the others. She'd run off or something, and they didn't talk about her much, and maybe it was for that reason that she was my favorite, her ghostly absence having as big an impact on my growing up as the others' larger-than-life presence. When I finally came to live in the hills, carrying my own dead twin in my arms, Tiff was already gone, leaving nothing behind but bad blood and a trunk filled with old clothes from across the ages. Among these were a pair of Roman sandals that fell apart in my hands, some rusted crinolines, a moldy cat-o'-nine-tails, some concert t-shirts, and even a notebook from her days at the Blood Temple with the father, bound in the skin of one of her victims for all I knew. The pages were scribbled in with illegible symbols which set something humming inside me and convinced me from day one that Auntie Tiff wanted me, and only me, to find her. I was good at finding lost things, Kai always said, and they were good at finding me. In time, Narn, the oldest sister, sent me away to Wellsburg College, 10,000 miles away and on the other side of the planet, to the ends of the earth may as well have been. I had arrived at campus just before the start of semester and was soon sick with one of my frequent chest infections. I lay awake in the Tower Village dorm room, feverish and snotty, too ill to go to the first week of classes, forgetting why I was here. The damp pillowcase chafed my cheek. The weary thwack of a campus security pod overhead tangled in the jerky drum of my heart, and I tried to push thoughts the father's birds away. Couldn't help wondering how far I'd really come from all that. Narn and her crazy sisters, and my sister Kai, buried under a bloodwood tree high in the Starveling Hills. I tried not to think about any of that. I tried not to ask myself if far would ever be far enough. My pajamas, blue plaid with pink elephants, were damp with sweat. They insistently nudged between my legs. I shifted on the mattress, trying not to think of the downy young shearers who drank at the pub in the nearest town to our hut, a 20-kilometer drive in Narn's truck, but worth every pothole. I was 19 and Kai would be too, my better half as Narn called her, not joking. Narn never joked. Maybe that's why Kai had been her favorite from the beginning, law of opposites or something. My sister always joked, even when she lay in the Blood Temple infirmary covered with sores, and the father already sharpening his scalpels for the unmaking, even then. The door opened with a click. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping my roommates Lara and Trudy would leave me alone. Their laughter subsided when they saw me still in bed, but they continued their conversation in whispers, something about an urban myth of a ghost of a fur hunter from the 1800s who crawled out from under the bridge after being pushed to his death by a witch. Yeah, but don't most old colleges in the slant come with some kind of scary story, Trudy was saying. In orientation, they told us. I couldn't resist. Partly because in the mostly bedridden week that I'd been at the Tower Village, I'd barely spoken or been spoken to, but also because long before I'd even got here, Narn had versed me in the history of witches' rights. He jumped, I interrupted. Probably. They had to blame somebody. Why not witches? Know-it-all, Lara said beneath her breath. No, Kai was the know-it-all. Always had been. My cheeks burned with fever, but there was no stopping me now. Kai always said how just a sniff of threat was enough to make me see red. Witches got the blame for the fur trade drying up in Upper Slant, I continued. People said they poisoned the game. Even after the apology, it wasn't safe for them. The air in the dorm room was stale. My nose was blocked with congestion, so I drew it in as best as I could through my mouth, watching Trudy dart through the shadows like a bottom feeder through lakeweed. For a moment, the meds and the fever telling me that it was Kai, that my dead twin was not dead after all, and that I was home in the Starvelings, and the father had not found us as she always said he would. But then Lara flicked on the light, and I blinked into the reality of what I'd lost.
Okay, now I'm going to read from the second chapter of Ariadne, I Love You. She told me she wanted a cat, Ben said. We were in the kitchen of his Newtown terrace. The windows were steamed, Ben's glasses too. He reached into the pot with a slotted spoon and teased out a quill of pasta, tested it, pulled a face. I was perched on a stool at the breakfast bar, beneath a rack of dangling pans. Ben uncorked another red, raised his eyebrows and waved the bottle in my direction. I nodded and knocked back what was in my glass, held it out for him to fill. And she banged on and on about it, wouldn't let it go. You know what kids are like. I can imagine, I said, but I was only half listening. Since I arrived that afternoon, Ben had talked about nothing but parenthood, the quirks and foibles of this or that offspring. I stifled a yawn between pressed lips, washed it down with another glug of red. Anyway, I was this close to going down the shelter and picking one out when I twigged. It wasn't a pet she wanted, it was a cadaver. Ben tasted the sauce, started laying out bowls for us and the girls. I said no, of course. You got to draw the line somewhere. Is this all since? I couldn't bring myself to say it. We hadn't yet spoken about Kareem. Ben shook his head. Nah, Margot's pretty much always been a dark one. Scientific, she'd call it. The bones thing started with a wombat skull she found last time we were down the train. This kitchen's been like a mortician's lab ever since. We've had birds, rats, lizards, all stretched out on the chopping board to be skinned and dissected, the bones boiled clean. I'm not even sure they're all dead when she finds them. I pulled a face, hoping it conveyed the expected emotion. I'd caught a glimpse of Margot's room on my last piss stop. The velvety purple walls, the gleaming bell jars, the displays of mounted animal skeletons and antique taxidermy. It was more like a ghoulish private museum than an 8-year-old's bedroom. A couple of months after I shut it down, she came home with something in a plastic bag. It stank, and flies were buzzing. Ben shook his head again. Our neighbour's cat had been hit by a car, and Margot scooped it out of the gutter and brought it home. Christ, what a mess! I had to help her disembowel it, and the bloody thing was so big we had to go down the hardware store for an industrial-sized pot. I glanced over Ben's shoulder at the pot on the stove, wisps of vapour curling from the rim. The kitchen stank for weeks, and I still can't look the Habibis in the eye. Is dinner ever going to be ready? Peg erupted into the kitchen, a 5-year-old whirlwind of strawberry blonde hair and rainbow tie-dye. She seemed to explode out of another dimension, where standing still was a capital crime, and every object on the floor a stepping stone. I scooped up my bag and put it on the stool beside me. Just serving now, said Ben. Go tell your sister. Ben laid the table and invited me to sit, spooned pasta and sauce into the bowls, garnished all but one with some chopped green stuff. He was just tearing the bread when Peg burst back in, Margot walking stiffly behind her. My heart stopped when I looked up, and I prickled all over, like I was seeing a ghost. Margot was the mirror image of her mother, but at the same time not like her at all. A waxwork, both identical and wrong. Her hair was the same midnight black, but unlike Kareen's, it hung in a straight, neat bob. Her skin had the same powdery whiteness, but on Margot it looked ashen, almost consumptive. And the thought of Kareen in a starched white blouse and old-style charcoal pinafore was absurd. In two details, though, she was completely identical, and it was these that held me dangling over the pit in my own stomach. Her mouth was pulled down at the edges in a frown that I knew would express both amusement and displeasure, and her eyes— I realised I was staring and flicked my gaze around the walls, as though Margot was just one piece in a gallery full of other, more diverting exhibits. She looked at me without interest. You must be the one from Daddy's band, she said. Okay, fantastic. Well, that was a really great reading. Thank you, JS. It's just to kind of give a bit of a, I guess, a bit of an intro to the bridge, and you can stop me and go, that's not what it's about. So from my reading, you've got two stories going on in a way in this book. You know, you've got a story of this kind of outsider who is basically kind of not exactly fleeing, but you know, moving away from this traumatic past in a, you know, deeply dystopian and messed up kind of childhood, and has this opportunity to go to university. And the sort of the flip side of her past is that she's just trying to, you know, trying to find her place at uni, and in a kind of quite conventional world, I guess.
Right.
And then at the same time, you've got this story of a kind of, you know, her just coming to terms with what was going on in her past, and trying to, how do you bring the past into the present to kind of become truly yourself, I guess, integrating those two sides.
Yeah.
And then there's another piece for me. So this is a protracted intro, but I'm getting to the point here.
I like it's better than I could have done.
Okay, this is good. So in that past, you know, it's obviously kind of traumatic and terrible, but at the same time, it's you know, it gives her access to something kind of wonderful in a way. You know, like her relationship with the sisters and Nan in particular, and the kind of magic that exists, like a very real and very freaky kind of magic that was part of her upbringing. And then you have this flip side of her life at university, which is kind of, in a way, it's bland by comparison. You know, the world that she's moving into on the other side of the tracks, it is very kind of conventional, and it's one where people are sort of there keen to sort of exploit her stories and exploit that past.
Fateable.
So
Yeah.
between those two things, and this is where bringing it to the point here, between those two things, throughout the book, you have the bridge as a physical presence and as a kind of metaphorical presence that binds, you know, the two sides of the campus, that binds the past and the future, and there's all like stitched throughout it. You have the bridge as this very powerful image, both physically and metaphorically. I just wanted to, I guess, dig into that a little bit to sort of understand where did this come from? You know, did it start with the bridge, or did the bridge kind of emerge as the sort of central image for you?
I think the bridge, yeah, I think the bridge is the central image. The bridge was kind of the bridge and storytelling, you know, were where the thing kind of, and storytelling as a bridge between, as you said, you know, these two worlds. I mean, we are storytellers by nature, by makeup, and you know, how do stories bridge, you know, our past and our present, our humanity and our you know, non-human side, our genders, our genres. I mean, you know, so I was, you know, the character that I wrote is standing on this bridge, and for the guests and readers there, you can see behind me the bridge that Luke Spooner, the genius cover artist of the bridge, drew, and I think it's very sort of true to my. I'll just see if I can. Yeah, so that's the bridge there, and it's blue lit, and that's how it looks in the book. It was certainly how it looks in my conception of it, which Luke was able to really kind of get. And I think that's it. It's a very real bridge. It's the bridge between the two campuses, as you said, this sort of very sort of banal university that she ends up going to. And I think for many of us, not maybe for Jude and Ben, but your Jude and Ben, but for many of us, university is kind of bland, you know, and it depending on, you know, where we are, it can be disappointing, and it certainly was, you know, or certainly is for Mira. She feels that she's been basically, you know, shunted from the frying pan into the fire, and so there is this kind of sense that she would love to be just go back the other way across the bridge and back to her past, this kind of really rich world that she was raised in with her witchy rescuer. I mean, there is no nostalgia, obviously, for the cult. You know, when you mention that whole dystopian background, I mean, the cult that she was rescued from, obviously, is something that she's very glad to escape. And in that sense, you know, Kai, her dead sister, is sort of the bridge between those terrible memories and the memories that that Mira can't access, and where she is now at 19, having to live with this kind of gap in her memory of what actually happened there, and how her sister died, and to what extent Mira was to blame, you know, for that death. So yeah, the bridge does function as kind of a catch-all kind of image and catch-all place in the book, but and the novel started from that moment, yeah, being on the bridge.
So you touched on storytelling, and you know that really is it's a very kind of rich theme all the way through the book. And something that really struck me, and this kind of ties back to that kind of two-sided thing, the kind of dichotomy kind of thing you've got going with the image of the bridge, is this sort of very visceral, magic-based storytelling that's almost kind of not even in a human tongue, that's kind of coming from her past. And then you have this fictional forms, you know, the course that Mira goes to study, which is this kind of very, it's almost like the wrong kind of anthropology, you know, where you have kind of the sort of old school pre-ethics anthropology, where it's like, let's just go kind of check out how these weird people live, and then we'll kind of make our careers by writing books about other weird people. You know, there's that really strong vibe of exploitation from Pagan, who's the kind of you know, she's just the real sort of Heathers group of girls of which she's the leader, and the what's it, the fearsome Gatherum, is a kind of culmination of this, almost like a it's almost like kind of making pornography out of somebody else's stories, and the more messed up the better, you know, and the more real and the more horrible a kind of experience they've had. And there's something I just found wonderful in the translation, like Mira's going through this kind of process of translating the stories of her past into something that gives her power in the present.
Exactly.
There's this kind of the tension is with, is it at her expense, you know, or like because of the FIFO, Pagan, and I'm trying to remember her name, Sasha Younger. There's this sense that they're, you know, this isn't going to turn out well for Mira.
So she thinks she thinks she can game the system, you know. She thinks that she can, that exactly as you say, you know, she can. And it plays into the whole thing about, like, you know, I mean, obviously the gender politics are something that are quite strong in the novel, and it comes into the whole thing about, you know, women thinking that they can objectify themselves and then use that power, and like that's just probably not going to, you know, end up necessarily all that well. And she kind of really does objectify herself in terms of, okay, you want trauma porn, I'll give you trauma porn, you know, and I'll raise your trauma porn. And so she kind of does all this, and then, you know, she's recruited, as you said, sort of right out of FIFO, the, you know, creative writing 101. It's a secret sort of storytelling kind of cabal, and she's out of her depth. You know, once she gets there, and once she gets into the kind of the hands of Sasha Younger, you know, Pagan is somebody, as you said, we all recognize. You know, she's sort of the Heathers kind of mean girl, is popular, but Sasha is not, might be, you know, is kind of a different animal, and the question is if Mira is going to be kind of is going to kind of dig that, is going to get wise to that soon enough to say.
Yeah.
But,
if she's going to get wise to it, or if it's going to, I mean, it's like either she'll be devoured by it,
right.
or there's this kind of, is she going to kind of flip over into?
Yeah, that's right. When her friend, sort of says, Marvin says to her, have you gone native? He calls her Dorothy, like in The Wizard of Oz, and he says, "You gone native, Dorothy?" And she thinks about it, and she thinks that she can't. She thinks that she doesn't have it in her to go native, because she's actually sort of a different species, it's just like an undercover cop, she's actually, maids are a different type of humans than the regulars are. So she kind of, look, by definition, I can't go native. I'll always be a maid. But there are other problems.
I'm chuffed that you brought up The Wizard of Oz, because that's actually, I've got this down here to ask you about. Obviously there is a kind of Wizard of Oz connection with, Marvin kind of calling her Dorothy, but it strikes me that it's like the Wizard of Oz in reverse, where in the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy moves from this kind of very bland, in the movie, a black and white universe on the farm, this very kind of prosaic past, into a kind of glorious Technicolor, weird, crazy future. And it's almost like it works exactly the opposite way around for Mira, that she's leaving this kind of mad, psychedelic magic background and entering a world that's kind of very sheer and black and white and conventional.
It's why she's so drawn to the world across the bridge. So the campus, for example, and a lot of this comes from my own experience, like working both as a student at university myself and teaching there. And some campuses can be these red brick kind of commuter colleges that are kind of that don't seem to have much soul, and that's the one, these purpose-built sort of places, and that's kind of where she finds herself. It's not at all the romantic idea of what college should be, but across the river is the old campus. Across the river is this kind of Gothic revival sort of campus with its ivy, and its bricks and its gas lamps and all of that, and its quads, and it's kind of everything that you kind of sort of, it's Harry Potter. And so that's exactly right. So to her, there's something like, okay, so the magic is over there. I need to get over there, because she doesn't know how to navigate a world, as you kind of pointed out, that doesn't have magic in it.
Yep.
So any kind of magic is better than no magic, and that's sort of where she is drawn. I'll be okay once I get over there, where there's a vibe, but there's no vibe here. I don't know what to do. I'm drowning in too much vibelessness. So she kind of, has got to get to somewhere where, even if the magic is bad magic, and even if the mojo is bad mojo, at least, there's some that's her rationale anyway. It obviously.
At least it's magic.
Sorry.
At least it's magic.
At least it's magic, and I think that's a really kind of, and I think that's a very much I really wanted to, create a character that was sort of recognizably 19. And 19 is such a standing on the bridge age. And it's such a standing on the bridge time. It's a time where way too much and yet not enough. And that was the character that I really wanted to. So not only obviously to write, a book of magic and horror and so on, but also to have a character that many of us can recognize as being 19, that incredibly, vulnerable age, and also an age that, people, a lot of people kind of don't survive, from young soldiers to, university students to people who, everything is coming down on you so fast at 19. So yeah, I wanted to bring that into it as well.
Now you touched, I better make this the last question. You touched on gender politics, and that really is obviously a very overt, almost kind of spinal element to the book. It's absolutely critical to it, and the book's quite, angry in a way, sort of like righteously angry in a way that I found kind of quite exhilarating. Obviously, a big theme too is sisterhood.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of twins, Kai and Mira, and then you have the kind of the triplet Fury witch characters. I just want to kind of go into sisterhood a bit, and something that I love, Kai and Mira are these twins. They're non-identical. I just love the way Nan is always calling Mira the crappy twin. It's so
crappy one, right?
Yeah, but it also has that kind of it makes me think of that fairy tale trope of, it's always the sort of like the idiot brother.
Mm-hmm.
It's always the kind of youngest and most stupid, the one that nobody thought was going to make anything of themselves. They're always the one that kind of makes everything kind of come good. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of, I guess, explore quickly a bit about the sisterhood thing, but also the kind of connections to the sort of deeper mythology that's obviously underpinning a lot of the ideas in the story.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I'll just have to be brief.
Sorry.
The story, as I have pointed out before, and do in the notes at the end of it, at the end of the book, is in a sense, I mean, the whole story isn't a rewriting of the Furies myth, or the myth of the Eumenides, but it's definitely, that's always been one of my favorite sort of, Homeric stories.
Yeah.
And I really love Aeschylus's play, the Eumenides, and I just really dig the whole idea of these three sisters sort of self-conjured from the blood of Uranus. And it's an angry myth. It's an angry beginning. It's a beginning filled with rage and filled with blood, and that has always, I think, and Salvador Dali's brilliant, painting of the Furies as well is just one that, I have on my desk, and it's just been something that I've kind of wanted to work into fiction, for a long time. So this was an opportunity to do that. There is, on a sort of a more, sort of practical theme or practical kind of level, sisters and sisterhood is something that we can relate to, both as sisters and as friends. You can sometimes feel more like a sister with somebody who isn't your blood than you can with somebody who is, or you can feel just as much. I mean, I've got two wonderful sisters. I'm one of three sisters myself, but I also have great friends, I also had a friend that at 19 with whom I felt a sense of kinship that was like being a twin, and sadly she didn't survive. And so the story is in a sense a way for me to work through that experience of losing somebody that I was so much that made me whole, and so that's kind of, those sort of three things sort of are definitely there. And but I don't think that thematically or narratively it is a girl's story or a woman's story. There are lots of sort of people of or beings in the novel of all genders, and all kinds of concerns, and all kinds of kind of alliances and affections and afflictions and so on. So it certainly while you know, and it looks at girls groups at French at college and high school and so on, and those kind of, you know, those little cliques and all that, you know. So but I think that a lot of, like, you were able to relate to it. You were able to recognize certain things about it. That, so I don't think that, you know, you need to necessarily be a sister or to be female or anything like that. Yeah.
No. It definitely has a kind of a broad appeal, but I, not wanting to kind of cut it down to being like, oh, this book's only for women. It's
Yeah.
sort of opposite of that. But there was a kind of, I guess, a clarion call aspect to it. Yeah, I don't know, just the sort of palpable rage, which
Sure.
found wonderful.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that was a great question, and I have so many for you as well.
Okay, we're gonna do this.
Sure. So I loved Ariadne, obviously, and I have it in front of me now. Boom. So I guess where shall I start? I kind of had a whole, again, like you, I had this sort of whole list of questions, and so many things that, like, we need to talk about. We need to talk about. But so I tried to sort of like weed out things that I thought some of our listeners and guests at the launch would also be interested in, either before or after or during. So I kind of just, I guess, wanted to ask you, let's see, yeah, again, similarly, with how you started with me, what are the origins of the story? Where does it come from?
Okay, there's a sort of couple of pieces. I guess with like most ideas, you know, you have lots of little kernels, and at some point they sort of smash together and turn into something that's alive. The sort of first kernel of this was a book that I read like 20 years ago or 25 years ago called The Story of Philosophy, which is a kind of Reader's Digest style, you know, like a few pages to a philosopher. And it's kind of about the lives of particular philosophers, but it kind of weaves in there. So it's like joint biography, a bit of an overview of their ideas just in a few pages. And I remember at the time being really struck by this thing about Nietzsche, about him going just crazy at the end of his life, and starting sending out all these kind of mad letters to people and signing them Jesus, like Dionysus and stuff, and like quite inflammatory letters that he sent out to, you know, royalty and celebrities of the time, but also to kind of people that he knew really well. And one of them was this letter to Cosima Wagner, sorry, you know, the wife of Richard Wagner, you know, the composer who Nietzsche just was completely obsessed with. And it just said, you know, Ariadne, I love you. And I was like, just reading this going, what? I mean, clearly he was bonkers, but like, what goes on in your head when you kind of send that kind of, what are you expecting is going to happen from that kind of missive, you know? And that idea sort of settled in my head ages ago. And I started a story with that name, with a similar kind of non-supernatural premise, but it was way too bleak and I couldn't finish it. And you know, flash to the future, I moved to Australia. I'm living in a train carriage down on the south coast with my wife Rosie, and she went away for a couple of weeks on a work trip, and so I was left alone, like no neighbours in, you know, like hundreds of meters to your next neighbour, and it's the kind of the first time in my life I'd ever been properly alone, you know, like abandoned to the wilderness, kind of alone. And this thing, just one night, like I was totally freaked out by the darkness and just being surrounded by the sort of wild bush. And there was one night where I was sitting out, and down in the gully in the dark, I could see a light moving around. I'm just like, what the fuck is that? First thought, obviously, is, you know, there's someone down there with a torch. There's someone, you know, and it just freaked me out for days. And anyway, so when I started writing this story or conceiving this story, those two things kind of just sort of smushed together. I can't remember how. And the whole music thing kind of got smushed in there with it too. Yeah, so that was where it kind of started.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, well, I'm gonna ask then about the setting, because I thought that, and I know that everyone will agree, that the setting just was palpable. I mean, I really, really felt it, like that, the surrounds of the train carriage. I mean, and also London and Sydney, and I really felt, I mean, for somebody who really connects with place in what I read, I love to feel like I'm really in that place, and I absolutely did. I felt particularly the descriptions of the area around the train carriage and the gully and all of that. And I'm wondering how, I guess, we've talked about this, whether or not, I mean, you and I are both hyphenated Australians, and I'm just wondering, I whether you feel that, and I have felt similarly when I've been alone in the Aussie bush, and particularly when I first kind of came here and those early experiences. I don't feel that way so much now, but I know when I first came here, similarly, I had sort of a similar experience with you, just feeling this incredible creeping sense of something else out there, to the extent where I was absolutely terrified. I was in a gully and I just thought, I'm disappearing here. I'm disappearing here. I'll always remember that.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if the fact that you are writing not as an outsider, or that you remember that, because you're no longer an outsider, but you remember that experience when you perhaps were a bit newer to to Australia, does that give you, did it add an added sense of?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think I was very aware that I was channeling it when I was writing that stuff. Particularly those kind of scenes at the train, and because in the story, Jude, he's kind of landed just in the city in Australia. He's been there a few weeks.
Yeah.
He just burns all his bridges and ends up in this kind of train in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so it's all very fresh to him. He hasn't even had time to become accustomed to the fact that the spiders in Australia kill you.
Yeah, that's right.
And so there's definitely, I was definitely channeling that pretty hard when I was writing, his kind of connection or not to the place that he's in. But I think that that kind of dual nature that you're talking about, I think that definitely informs so much of what I write. I mean, definitely it's very prominent in this book, but I have this real, as soon as you move to a new place, you become a stranger to both places.
That's it, exactly.
You're sort of not welcome anywhere anymore. There's nowhere that you can really call home. And everything is strange. There's, and particularly for cultures where they're borderline similar. Australia and the UK, it's not that different, from the sort of Western cultural perspective. And when I remember when I first moved to Australia, being sort of confused by how different things weren't.
Yes.
And but I get lulled into thinking that I hadn't moved.
Yeah.
And then there'd be something that was not what I expected, but just a little bit off. And it would be like, sort of glitch in the matrix stuff. You're like, what? Or you talk to people, make friends at work, and you kind of be talking about stuff. You're like, yeah, we get on so many levels. And then they start making a reference from a TV show from 20 years ago, and you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And you just realize.
Or a band or an anthem, say, from, Australia,
Exactly.
70s or 80s and so on. And, you just kind of were like, yeah, no, I don't know what.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me. So, I always had that kind of feeling of one of my favorite Philip K. Dick books, Time Out of Joint, where, there's this guy.
Yeah.
I won't go into it, but, the bottom line is this guy is kind of like, I've got a memory of this other place that jars with my experience of now, and I don't think that where I am is where I really am.
Yeah.
And I kept having those kind of experiences. There's this one like very prominent bit where he goes into a bathroom and reaches for a drawer cord light switch, but he's never had one in his house, and his whole kind of sense of reality crumbles from that. And it's that kind of experience, that strangeness,
and that ability to make something familiar strange, like to that the eye, that insight, or and it's the same with non-Americans making the best American movies, and non-Brits, not non, but hyphen, people with that duality, that sense of something else that informs. I mean, we both know people who do Australian settings absolutely brilliantly, authors like Karen Moran and Angela Slater and so on, but we come to it with a slightly just a different view. And I thought that was something that I absolutely loved in both of your novels. Actually, it was also very strong in your the Blue Mountains setting for the Attic Tragedy. I just it was like I was transported there, just not just to the setting itself, but to the feeling of the setting.
Right. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, no, I thought that really gripped me, and I found myself just, there's still the little bits, and I just found myself, just kind of, like, just to begin, the sun was long down, and my denim jacket was no protection against the prickling cold, and I just know that, like, you don't expect Australia to be cold, but then you get somewhere and you're dressed for Australia,
yeah,
but that prickling chill. And so on. There are just so many that the gentle marionette gestures of branches, the softening of leaves like the ocean in a seashell. It's just also good the way you describe the setting. I could go on and on. So what sort of research did you do for this? You've got these settings that you know well. Did you have to do lots of other research for this particular?
Probably the only bit of research I hate research. Okay, so I'm like the slack ass research guy. I basically only do research if I think someone's going to catch me out on something. And I don't get any joy from research. It doesn't excite me at all. It takes me away from the thing that I do enjoy, which is just fucking around in my imagination, basically. And the only thing that will compel me to research is the sense that I'll do something sloppy and kick someone out of the story. So like I'll just kind of cover my, so probably the only research I did for this book was about the timelines of particular alt country bands. Because everything else was kind of drawn quite heavily from my own experience. Not autobiographical anyway, but I'm an ex-musician. I had lots of friends that I was in bands with that lived in exactly that flat in Brixton, or variations of it in different parts of London. I don't know where the kind of Newtown thing came from. I just loved Newtown. So I think I was actually sort of vicariously moving into my dream house in Newtown for that. And then the train, obviously, it's like, that's a place. It's a real place. And in a way, I've kind of ruined it for myself now, actually, by setting something scary there. Because every time I go back, I've been over it so many times in my imagination that, the bad things that are in the book are actually there in the real place. I've kind of ruined it for myself.
Yeah, they can never be unseen.
Yeah.
I must say everything did feel incredibly authentic and real. Just the Sydney bar, just the uni bar and the Brixton flat and so on. It definitely. But did you have to reread Nietzsche?
Do I have to do what?
You have to reread Birth of Tragedy.
Oh yeah, God, yeah. I actually, I probably read it several times. Once I read it and then wrote the story like sort of 10 years after reading it. And then when I was doing edits, it was like, I think I'm kind of winging it with this. I better go back and actually read it to see if anything that I'm saying here is real. And which of course it wasn't. So I had to kind of rewrite a lot of stuff. Yeah. For Kareem to be real. Like, again, I didn't want it to be about I didn't want it to be about that book or about Nietzsche, except in as much as it kind of illuminated the characters of the people that were connected to it.
Well, it's sort of that way, you know, the fact that she is attracted to the book. I mean, I love her attraction. Do we have time to just talk about Corinne for a little while? I know that you
Let's do it quickly. Let's make this the last.
all right, well, then I'm going to make sure it's a good one because I had so many questions. Well,
carry on your train of thought.
I want to talk about Corinne, or I want you to talk about Corinne in many different contexts. Let's talk about her in two contexts if you have time.
Sure.
It's up to you what you do. In the context of the male gaze, where I think that you handle that so well. You control that so well from the very first chapter, you know, where you foreshadow just how badly this is going to go. When he's looking at the picture and of the two of them, of Corinne and her husband Ben, and all he folds Ben's back. He's only looking at Corinne, the main character Jude, and he's looking at her, and he says, her fierce blue eyes fixed on mine, and from then on, you know that this is a male fantasy, that this is you know that this is a story about the, I guess, murderous in a sense male gaze, and you know, you do a really brave thing here by making your protagonist Jude be somebody who is so flawed, you know, who just doesn't, who obsesses over this fantasy woman, and is just sort of lacks all awareness of that until, well, I don't want to spoil it for anybody. So I want to talk about the male gaze and why and how you decided to you know, and in terms of Corinne. And the second thing, if you wanted to maybe talk about this whole idea of the triangle, you know, the triangle of like Nietzsche and Cosima and Wagner, and then you've got the sort of the Ben, Jude, or Jude, and you know, Jude, the name Jude as well. We could, like I said, this is so much to ask about why. Then there's the Jude, Corinne, Ben one, but that's, I don't think, the real triangle. But anyway.
Okay, well, let's go with the kind of the gaze piece, because I mean, that was something that I was really, really aware of when writing it, and in a way it was intentional, and in a way it was accidental. Like it sort of emerged accidentally through trying to portray a real person. You know, I mean, sorry, you know, Corinne's not based on any person, but you know, trying to make a character real, and you know, she had to be real for the story to work at all, and you know, because otherwise it's just like another kind of, like you say, it's just another. I didn't want the book to be my boring male fantasy, you know, but to be about that. And you know, and it's a big difference. And there's a whole thing with, you know, writing the other. It's so easy to just slip into unreality, actually, and you don't know, because you're not that person, you know, you're not coming from that perspective. So I wanted to work really hard to make her real and come alive, and it was sort of necessary, actually, for it to not be unbearable. But in doing that, and kind of in exploring that relationship, or sort of non-relationship almost, it really became almost like a central idea. You know, it becomes like that's what her PhD is about. Is you know, kind of similar dynamic with F. Scott Fitzgerald, who completely objectified his wife, you know, and there are terrible consequences for her on that. Like, he basically staked his entire career writing these sort of tragic fantasies, essentially about his own relationship.
And madness, you know, that Zelda and Corinne, both the madness that,
Exactly. And there's a huge consequence to this, and the consequence in Ariadne, I Love You, it's indirect, but and in a way I think it is in these kind of, in the other sort of real life situations as well, but there are these nebulous almost like karmic forces that kind of reach out and fuck things up for people who are gazed upon in the wrong way. It's a kind of dark magic.
It is, yeah, right.
And we better cut this short. I could just keep talking about this until the end of time, and I'd love to explore more about the bridge. So I think we're going to have to wrap this up for our audience here, and we're going to have a bit of a live Q&A after this. I hope you'll join us for that. But then you and I have to finish this conversation over a beer sometime.
Martini, maybe.
Okay. Thanks, JS. It's been fantastic hanging out, and I look forward to catching up with you in the Q&A.
For sure. Bye.
Okay, bye. So feed us questions, guys. We're here to answer your questions. We're going to announce the giveaway, but we want to hear from you, so that we're not just kind of staring into a void. JS and I have been kind of staring at each other like this quite a lot in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and we're still wearing the same clothes.
Yeah. A measure of how much sleep has happened in the preparation.
Oh, and Aaron is there as well. Hi,
oh, okay, that's great. Ask us questions, people. Oh, we're just going to start talking about random things.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question, Joseph.
Okay.
What was the, I guess it's a complicated question to ask a writer because there's so much that goes into the writing as well as the typing, but what was the part of maybe writing your book that you enjoyed the most, and what was the bit that you enjoyed the least for whatever reason?
Okay. The bit I enjoyed most was making it work. Like making it come together.
Seeing it all come together, yeah.
And that was not a thing that happened on the page, but actually my eldest son was kind of going through a bit of a rough patch of sleeping at the time, and I needed to basically kind of lie with him, listening to music or whatever. Oh, I'm going up in the turbo lift.
Yes, I'm going up. Yeah. I need to stand up. Sorry, my back's a bit sore, but yeah, go ahead.
That's okay. And in those kind of what seemed like interminable periods, lying in the dark, waiting for him to go to sleep, I would be kind of in my head with all these sort of unresolved plot things going on,
right.
and kind of writing them in my head. Not writing the words, but just thinking through how everything worked together. And those points where things kind of just suddenly are illuminated, hands down the best. I mean, in this and in anything,
and it's an interesting how our children can be a kind of a muse for that. I've always found that just cuddling up to a kid or having afternoon tea with or maybe not your kid, but someone who loves you and you love can sometimes be a generator for some of the most successful parts of a book, I find.
That's very kind. For me, it was boredom. Sleep. Just go to sleep. Having to be somewhere. And it's like, and I don't know if you had this with them. It may have been a while since you were reading stories to your kids, but there's like stories that you read so many times that you could just read it in your sleep and you're just thinking about some other shit while you're reading that story.
Like one part of you is engaged in the reading and the other
well, it's just your mouth kind of going blah, 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 blah.
Stuff.
Yeah.
It looks like we've got some questions coming up, actually.
Oh, that's good. Can you start asking questions?
I'm going to circle back to your part 2 of the bit that you hated the most of writing it, and so we have a question from Georgina. We have lots of questions actually, so let me go ahead and why don't you answer Georgina's question, Joseph?
I can't see it, that's why.
Oh, okay. Joseph, given the Nietzsche letter providing the source of the book's title, is there any connection in your story to the Minoan Ariadne of mythology?
No, there's not. No, none whatsoever. No. No, I was aware that was a potentially rich thematic scene to stitch into it, but there was already a lot going on there was already so much going on. I was like, no, I'll leave the labyrinth for some other thing. But no, it's great notes.
But I definitely, because of the title, I came up with my own connection. I mean, just because of the labyrinthian nature of, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but the labyrinthian nature of what's his name's gone out of my head, the main characters, his personality, that kind of round and round, and then in those final chapters, again, that I don't want to spoil, there definitely is a sort of a circular labyrinthian denouement, you know. So
completely accidental.
It looks like Trisha has a question for me.
Okay.
Where did I come up with Naren's speech patterns, which I adore? Thank you, Trisha. Yeah. I know it just was how she spoke to me. And it, like, just listening to her speak, that's kind of, it just seemed to come. And I did have to tweak it though, because you know, I didn't want it to sound when I was rendering it straight from how I heard her speak in my mind to the page, as we all know, it can come out sounding it too hammy. So I did have to kind of tone it down a little bit, so that basically it was comprehensible to the reader, because if it was too, you know, kind of rendering any pigeon onto the page is difficult, because you can lose. It can be distracting. The reader is too much swept up in the dialect or the pidgin or whatever, and it can really sort of other and all of that. So I definitely had to kind of hear her and then put her through a little bit of a filter, and that's how she ended up on the page.
Now I actually can see questions now, so I'm going to ask you another one, JS. So Andrea asks, when is the Australian launch for your respective works? So do you want to go first?
So as Andrea would know, living in Sydney, we're in an indefinite lockdown. As far as I'm concerned, I do have Galaxy Bookstore standing by, and I also have the wonderful Angela Slater standing by. I have New South Books standing by for a September release of the Australian edition of the book. And that is kind of lucky in a way, because we are in lockdown now and all of the bookstores are closed. So when they reopen at the end of August or early September, that is the official release from the distributor of the books, and so they're going to get really behind it with, you know, with all the bookstores, and hopefully, you know, will not. Yeah, absolutely. As soon as Galaxy open, we'll do it. And you will be the first to know, Andrea. But yeah, so that's my answer anyway. I'm not sure about you, Joseph.
Well, for me, I planned to have a kind of live, you know, an in-person launch in Canberra. Canberra, we're in a very lucky position at the moment where we, touch wood, I've not checked the news today, but still don't have any active cases of COVID, but we are kind of watching it sweep across New South Wales, slowly encompassing the ACT, so it's probably a matter of time. Yeah, no, I'm very keen to have an in-person launch, and if I do, it'll be later on next month. So late August, at the latest early September, and I'll just have to post something. Yeah, I'll post something about it closer to the time.
And sorry, I just got, and then just kind of doing a bit of a talk amongst yourselves while I listen to
okay, well, so there's now Brian has asked me a question. Can I ask if Joseph thinks the ambiguity present in both his Meerkat novellas can be sustained for a longer work, or whether he thinks he will have to adapt his intent and style for a full-length novel? Well, that is
Big
That's a
question.
good question. Um, I mean, it's a good one. Like, I definitely think that there's something about the novella length, and JS, you can kind of chime in about this because you've written some masterly kind of dark fiction novellas and novelettes. It's a real sweet spot for a certain kind of horror and dark fiction, I think. Partly probably because of that reason. You know, I can think that there are definitely sort of works of intense ambiguity that managed to sustain it brilliantly for a novel length. I'm thinking of Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House
Right.
is, you know, par excellence, a kind of, you know, work of ambiguity in terms of, you know, is it really happening the way we're being told? So I'm sure it's possible. In terms of, from my perspective, who knows? I am on the brink of kind of putting the final touches to a novel which is completely non-ambiguous and also non-supernatural. So does that answer your question? Maybe no, but maybe yes. We'll, who knows? I'll give it a try.
I'd like to hear
About you?
more about that novel, Joseph. So you're
Okay.
working on a non-supernatural novel at the moment?
Yeah,
Is that
it's
right?
completely non-speculative too. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so it's, I have not really understood how to talk about it because
Okay.
I've just not known where to kind of put it, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not a literary work, but I haven't found the kind of genre place for it. But I think it's kind of a suburban suspense.
Oh, very nice.
It's probably the kind of closest thing. It's very much a family scenario, but where the child. So it's an 11-year-old sociopath, kind of coming into her power and taking her
Right.
family down
Yeah,
at
right,
the same
right.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nice, nice, nice. Well, you did a great job with that kind of very young, not maybe 11, but that juvenile voice in The Attic Tragedy. So, and I love your descriptions of the children, even in Ariadne, you know, that kind of that family life. I think there's one time where you describe the the younger child as just kind of just this force of nature,
Yeah.
and he kind of like slowly pulls his backpack out
Yeah.
from sort of, you know, hurricane-like path. So that was really well done.
Yeah.
Good observation of children. Yeah.
Thank you. And I mean, dare I ask, what's next for you, JS? You got what are you working on now?
Um,
Or are you not allowed to say?
no, it's fine. I kind of am. I'm in semi hiatus, I guess, a little bit. Just kind of like putting a few things, you know, to bed and waiting for the next kind of flash of inspiration. But I kind of have a few ideas. I am working on a collaborative work at the moment, which we're wrapping. That's with Angela Slater, and yeah, just getting my short story collection kind of polished. And I do have another novel in the works, but actually it's going to be a novella. So, and I've written one novella before. No, I've written a couple novellas before, you're right. So I really love the form. I think that it is a wonderful form for in so many ways. It's a challenge for the writer because it's what you leave out that counts.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think they're so rewarding for the reader, and I think it's something that our audience can chime in on. Like, I personally love the sort of the lack of commitment required for a novella. That
Yeah.
you know, it gives you a very different thing to a novel. Where a novel, you kind of want to sort of sink into it and really get in with all the characters, and you know, it's like the difference between a TV series and a movie, in a way that you. With a kind of good novel, you actually just want to spend time with these people, whether they're detestable or not. And
Right.
with a novella, it's just you're kind of thrown in there, and it's like almost like the deepest emotional experience you can have without spending too much time, if you know what I mean. Like, I don't think you really get that resonance from a short story.
Yeah.
You know, that level of impact.
Yeah, for sure. And a novel is, as everyone who's written one knows, is one of the most exhausting things you can do. I mean, I'm still exhausted from The Bridge, and yeah, it's just as you know, it is just such a massive project. So it will be nice to take on something that is a little bit. A novel is unmanageable by nature.
Yeah.
It's just this kind of beast, this big woolly thing that gets away from you so easily, and 2 years later you end up rewriting it, and it's just, you know, it's just like this whole thing. But I have found in my limited experience with novellas that they can be a little bit more manageable. So looking forward to that.
Now, Laurie has a question for both of us, but I'll pitch it to you first. What is it about dark fiction that draws you towards it? And what are some of your favorite current writers of that genre?
Go ahead, you start while I think of my favorite writers.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I've got demons, and better out than in. It's a hard question to answer, because in a way it's so personal. I'm just kind of drawn to that sort of stuff, and I do sort of believe strongly, you know, with you know, a handful of notable exceptions, almost all of the kind of horror writers that I've ever met, and dark fiction writers are the nicest, kindest, and most genuine people ever. And I do tend to feel that it's because they spend a lot of time just exorcising their demons. But, you know, maybe exercising them too. It's a different different vibe. In terms of kind of current writers of the genre, God, I'm hopeless with staying up in, you know, in the zone with things. Of course, Karen Warren always blows my mind with her work. Aaron Dries, who is the poet laureate of Splatterpunk, if you don't know him. Well, you know, I'm talking here to one of them. Like, I love JS's work. I've adored her collection Collision, and of course The Bridge. I'm very stoked to have the chance to talk about it today. I'm going to pitch this over to you now. You've had long enough.
Thanks, Joseph. And thanks for those words. And of course, they're reciprocated. I really enjoyed following the last couple of books of yours, and I loved The Attic Tragedy, and really enjoyed Ariadne as well. One of the things that if I can just say this quickly, one of the things that I told Joseph that I do really enjoy his work, and why I've enjoyed working with him on this launch, is because both of us are hyphenated Australians, and I really like the way he negotiated the two worlds of, you know, it's you know, Brian is talking about the novella novel thing. To me, you know, particularly Ariadne is a novella in the body, is a novel in the body of a novella. It is a novella, but it covers huge distances in space and time, and I absolutely love that about Joseph's work. As far as other people in the field, I mean, there are just so many, as Laurie would know. The list goes on and on. Laird Barron is probably going to be my all-time, always favorite. I'm rereading the Croning at the moment, with extraordinary work. Nathan Balingrud, Karen Warren. I love Aaron Dries' work. I saw that he is getting some love on Lit Reactor as well. For those of you who are fans of Aaron's, there's an interview or a write-up about him over at Lit Reactor. I mean, Stephen Graham Jones, Sarah Reed, Sarah Langan, the brilliant Kathy Koja, who just is, talk about the poet laureate of darkness, you know.
Yeah. Weird
so
darkness.
yeah, the weird darkness. Yeah, I mean, you know, John Langan, as Laurie would know, I am kind of in the tribe of weird writers, and they're just, you know, I guess, yeah, I mean, every time I think about one, then it moves, you know, Michael Sisko. There are too many to There are
I'm gonna,
just too
I'm
many
gonna,
to mention. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna shut
Oh
you
my
down
God.
because you haven't asked the question. You haven't answered the question, which is what draws you to the dark stuff?
I don't think that I was ever drawn to anything else, Laurie. I think that darkness for me is just a way of being. I don't necessarily, I'm not, you know, I wouldn't say I have, like, it's the demons are not what we all have demons, but that's not what necessarily drew me into it. I just think that it was a certain awareness or a certain sensitivity to something that lay outside or on, you know, this sort of in the shadows. And I was always really, really sensitized to that, you know, from as a child. And you know, I imprinted very early on Bradbury, Poe, you know, the Bronte sisters, that kind of thing. So it just seemed, I don't know of a time when you ask what drew me to it, I couldn't say because I was always there, really. I just seem to have started reading from that space, and that was the space from which I began to write as
I love
well.
that imprinting on, you know, just it's the idea of, you know, baby ducks.
100%, you know.
You pull out of the egg and there they are just waiting for you.
There's Stephen King's It just
Yeah.
waiting for you, and
Oh
then
God, yeah.
you know you carry that book with you all your life, you know, and so yeah.
Now I reckon we've got time for one last question, and then we'll announce the giveaway, and then we'll say goodbye. Thank you. You know, well, in a minute we'll say that. So this
Yeah.
last question comes from
It looks like
Roy.
there's two. Looks like there's two that we're missing. Sorry, there's Roy there. Hi, Roy. So good to see you. And also Georgina about the collaborative work with Angie. So Angela.
Okay, would you
So
want to say something about that before we ask Roy's?
just very quickly. Yeah. Thanks, Georgina. It is exciting. It's very near to being ready to finish, and it's a novella. And it's just been a joy working with the absolutely brilliant Angela Slater, who is right up there with my top dark fiction authors. And yeah, Roy, go ahead, Joseph.
Okay, I'll read it out. So now, so you both seem so brilliant at organic exposition. No, that's thank you, Roy. Is it something that takes a bit of rewriting to perfect? Jenny.
Oh, hell yes. So much.
Yeah.
So much. Roy, you know this. You're an author. You know what it takes to get something that affects people. Yeah. I mean, having said that, obviously, sometimes, you know, you write something raw and full of, you know, and that's, you know, you never touch it. That's how it goes into the book. For, you know, for me, it sort of yeah, I mean, there are certainly passages in the bridge that I banged out from the depths, and they remain pretty much untouched by the time they got to publication. But of course, writing is rewriting. So
Yeah.
Time.
Yeah. What she said. But something I'd add to that is I think it's way easier with first person stuff because all exposition is voice. You know, it's unlike a kind of a third person thing where you're having to kind of convey information that's sort of outside of the characters in a way. Anything that you're being told in a first person story, you're still sort of sitting in a room with that person telling you, you know, so it's still kind of alive with them. So yeah, exactly like JS was saying, like I definitely have bits that are sort of moments when you're kind of seized by the muse of the character that you're writing, where you're totally locked into their voice and stuff just goes blah, 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 and you go back to it and go that's it, you know, you kind of like take out a couple of that's and you're done. And there are other bits where I actually like 3 months going back and back and back over this one paragraph going, why, unlock your secrets, why won't you work?
Yeah, unlock your secrets is
Yeah.
a really good way to put it. Yeah. I would have to say though that I find first person a sort of a block. I struggled with this whole novel. It was one of the first, and I've written about this in that an article about moving from third to first and back again. For those who are interested,
Yeah.
it's going to be up next month at Lit Reactor. Yeah, so I actually found that the first person voice kind of hard to. That took me a little bit of more rewriting. Again, I think it just is possibly because I'd spent so much time and so much prose, writing in third person. So it was an adjustment process for me for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, man, I kind of feel like we could just talk and talk and talk, but we actually have to let everyone get back to their lives. And
Yeah.
thank everyone so much for joining us. Before we go, though, let's announce the giveaway. So 4 winners of free Meerkat ebook are, and just forgive me if I stuff up your names, everyone. I've got this scribbled down on a piece of paper, and my handwriting is so bad that even I can't read it. So Andrea Dimitripoulos, apologies, Andrea, I'm hopeless. Rivka,
Yay! Go, Andrea.
Celia Pierce, and Renee Hanlon. Congratulations, get a book. I think between me and JS, we'll kind of PM you to let you know how to claim those. Now, the all important, there was a kind of $25 gift voucher, which was a prize for engagement. So we have to kind of flick down here and go, man, who's been engaging the hardest here? Oh man, it's hard, and all of these comments just keep vanishing. So actually, I'm not going to announce that now. I'll post something in. We'll go back over the conversation, and we'll post something in the event to let you know about it. But anyway, thank you so much, everybody. I'm really stoked that you made it this morning this evening for US folks. Last words.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thanks to everyone. Really heartfelt thanks for turning up on Sunday morning, Saturday night. And thank you to Joseph. You've been a brilliant co-host. Thank you for looping me in on this and working so hard to produce this. And thank you, Meerkat Press, for everything. Yeah. You're wonderful. We love you.
And on that note, it's mic drop time. Thanks, everyone, and see you later.
Bye.